I'm not like a regular mom. I'm a cool mom. What are you doing here? Get out of my party. I don't know you. All right, I guess I know what I'm dealing with now. Hi. I've actually already done an intro for this video, but after completing this whole challenge that I decided to embark on, I kind of sat back and thought I wanted to reintroduce this video a little differently, so here we are. Essentially what I did was I read 7 anxiety books over the past 2 to 3 months. And initially when I decided to take on this whole experience, I planned for it to take me like 2 to 3 weeks. I didn't want to necessarily rush it, but I'm a pretty fast reader, so I thought it would be like a little bit quicker than that. As I got into reading the books that I'm going to talk about here in a second, I realized how much more this meant to me, so I could share with you guys my experience going through these books. Now, when I first filmed this intro, I realized I didn't even talk about my anxiety. I really brushed over it, and that's because it's very hard for me to talk about. I think it's hard for anyone to talk about something that they're dealing with or that they struggle with. And to be frankly honest, I've had anxiety my whole life. I don't remember a time in my life where I really wasn't experiencing it. And for what it's worth, I have been diagnosed with like panic disorder or anxiety disorder. Yeah, it sucks. I'm like laughing because I'm uncomfortable because I realize once this goes out on the internet, a lot of people might see it, or like, you know, a couple thousand, so. Some of my earliest childhood experiences is like dumping out other people's sack lunch so I could like hyperventilate into the paper bag. I was constantly in and out of doctor's offices, and I pretty much have seen a therapist since like the age of 7 or 8. And when I say anxiety, I mean like I need to pull over to the side of the road because I'm having a panic attack, or I am getting nervous about going out because I don't know if there's gonna be a crowd, or am I gonna like get overwhelmed and like hyperventilate and pass out and embarrass myself. Basically, sometimes I feel like I'm not functioning properly because like my mind and my body are not cooperating with me. It's been a constant in my life. When I was younger, I really thought I would outgrow it. And now that I'm at a stage in my life that I'm like, yup, I have not yet outgrown it. With this past year, with the pandemic, I think it's, with a lot of people, exasperated it. It's exasperated it for me. And I just thought this would be something I could try, not necessarily as like a substitute for therapy or medication, because I am obviously not a professional or doctor. These are mainly just like another tool I could access to see if it would help. And when I'm going through things in my life, one of the things I resort to is reading, so this was just like a natural thing for me. So now that I've kind of properly introed this video and what I will be doing, let's go ahead and jump to my original intro where I introduce the books and share with you guys like basically why I picked them. So I've got 7 different books here. First we have Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and it's all small stuff by Richard Carlson, who is a PhD. He's basically America's psychotherapist from my understanding, and he has like 20 of these don't sweat type of books, so plenty of iterations, but I picked the most popular best-selling one. Next we have Unfuck Your Brain by Faith G. Harper. It's edgy, it's kitschy, it's with the times, and it swears. Guts, which I picked up to kind of break up the monotony of reading because this is a graphic novel. I believe this is targeted towards like kids and teens, but you know, there might be some pearls of wisdom in here. The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine N. Aron. I almost take some slight offense to this because it's hitting a little bit close to home for me, because I would consider myself a highly sensitive person. Next we have How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie, or Carnegie, I guess, depending on how you want to pronounce that. Essentially the fundamentals of how to, and Dale Carnegie is kind of like the e-how in the book world back in the day. Next we have Overcoming Unwanted Intrusive Thoughts by Sally M. Winston. I think this would be really good for breaking the like negative feedback cycle that I tend to get into. I'm a catastrophizer, so we'll see how this goes. And then last but not least, I wanted to pick up like a workbook style anxiety book. I picked out Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Made Simple: 10 Strategies for Managing Anxiety, Depression, Anger, Panic, and Worry by Seth J. Gillihan. I am not at all saying that this is a substitution for therapy, so I'm just kind of using these as tools that are easily accessible for pretty much everyone. I mean, I bought all of these books secondhand for a couple bucks a piece, So if this is something that will help you maybe get over the hump or help you with your mindset or just your anxiety goals in general, I want to be able to like help navigate you through my eyes and how these are kind of working for me, if that makes sense. Okay. Thank you, Past Morgan. Okay, let's just go ahead and get into each of the books. Like I said, I'm gonna be sharing my thoughts, my honest thoughts, the main takeaways for me. I realize people who have read these books will probably take away something different, but you know, it's a very individual experience as far as anxiety goes or any type of mental issue or thing that you might be dealing with. So the first book that I'm going to be talking about is Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and it's all small stuff by Richard Carlson. Okay, so I started Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and there's a couple gems in here that I'm finding. I'm also having some questions I'm discovering as I'm reading through, and I didn't realize the format of this book was like this, but it's literally like a piece of advice and like a page or two on that piece of advice. This is essentially like a compilation of 100 different pieces of advice. So there are definitely bits of pearls of wisdom in this. He had some like making peace with imperfection, life is an emergency, creating patience with practice moments, allow yourself to be bored. One of the chapters that really spoke to me was life isn't an emergency, and a lot of times I forget to be like present in my life and in the moment and experience my life that way because I'm constantly like in a rush, or like I put these deadlines on myself, these arbitrary deadlines when I don't necessarily need to. Another one that I liked from this book was lower your tolerance to stress, and then lower your tolerance to be stressed, which was something that really stuck with me because it is kind of a weird societal issue that we have, that we admire people for their tolerance for stress levels. Like, I would like to have a higher stress level because then I could have the capacity to do more, but maybe that shouldn't be my ultimate goal. And this one it might be a little complicated for me to describe because essentially the idea is we always in society, modern day society, admire those who have a higher threshold for stress. So those people who are hard chargers that like work 18-hour days, I find myself wanting to be that person. Like I'm pushing myself to become that person when I'm just frankly not. And when you really think about it, there's no benefit in the quality of their life versus yours because they're able to, at least it appears to us, tolerate stress better than others. Quality of life does not equate the amount of things you can handle or productivity or anything like that. I know some of the happiest people in the world live the simplest lives. So at the end of the day, I'd rather be happy than stressed or be able to do a bunch of things. Now here's for me the issue that I had with this book. And again, it's most likely a personal thing because I am definitely a people pleaser. And a lot of the chapters in this book I felt like were very counterintuitive, or at least not great advice for someone who's a people pleaser like me. So some of the titles of the chapters in this book that I felt like were not great for people pleasers to follow: let other people be right most of the time, choose being kind over right. At the basic level, understand the point he's trying to get across. I also think it's important to take moments to stand up for yourself instead of just getting like steamrolled over in life. Yes, I am very conflict adverse, so for the most part, I understand and pretty much agree with that statement. Like most of the time it's really not worth it, right? But at the same time, I still want to make sure that I'm supporting my own feelings and emotions when I'm engaging with other people. So I could see how that could get misconstrued because for me, I had to reread those chapters a couple times to be like, wait a minute, what is he telling me? So I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. Next, we have Unfuck Your Brain. It's the I'm not like a regular mom, I'm a cool mom of self-help, and anxiety books. This book to me was trying so hard to be in touch with the cool kids, and then it inadvertently did quite the opposite. I love the whole explain it like I'm 5 type of concept, especially for complex ideas. So the part that was the main takeaway for me that really helped me the most from this book was her breaking down the different parts of the brain and explaining how they communicate with each other. To be fair, sometimes the conversational tone taken in this book I kind of liked. Like she called the prefrontal cortex the thinky part of the brain, and then she referred to the limbic system as the feely side of the brain. And then to me, I was like, okay, I get that. But I'm not kidding when I say this book was pure cringe at times. I would just like to read a sentence without having the F-bomb dropped every couple of sentences. Shut the up. I mean, it was a lot. And for me, hearing a therapist say that kind of thing. I'd also like to point out, she used the phrase, true dat. I've actually never heard someone use that in an unironic way. So I was like, all right, I guess I know what I'm dealing with now. Okay, so last night I did finish Unfuck Your Brain. There were some helpful tidbits of information in this. I just found the lingo of it a little distracting. Also, this book isn't specifically about anxiety itself. She did talk about other things like depression, which obviously ties pretty closely into anxiety a lot of times. Besides anxiety, she does talk about like depression and anger issues and other type of things you might be dealing with. Those parts weren't as relevant to me because I don't really find that I have any anger issues. I pretty much got the most help from the beginning of the book, and then after that it was just, I don't know, I didn't really get that much from it. Overall, I give this book like a 1.5 out of 5. Now, knowing I was going to be reading 7 books that for me were probably going to be not only emotionally daunting, but just dense to read in general, I decided to throw a graphic novel in there. And this author, Raina Telgemeier, which I hope I'm pronouncing that right, she's evidently like the queen of graphic novels as far as like self-help books. This one is called Guts, and it is about, I assume, a young Raina who is dealing with stomach issues, stress, daily life things that a lot of kids or teenagers deal with day to day. It seems like she touches a little bit on the idea of emetophobia, which I think I do have to a certain degree. Looking at this from a younger perspective, it normalizes the concept of dealing with stress, of dealing with stomach issues, of thoughts in your mind that you feel like you can't control, and getting help and seeking help from adults, a therapist, friends, talking about it. Now, while I feel like this did miss some plot points that I was a little confused on looking at it from like, I guess, an adult's perspective, I did like that it introduced the idea of like grounding, deep breathing, and again, talking to someone. So it did give some bits and pieces of tools you could utilize in your life. But if I'm gonna be honest, since I am reading this as me now being a 28-year-old woman, I don't know if this gave me a ton. I like the idea of this. I would definitely recommend this to younger viewers. So I give this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Following that, we have The Highly Sensitive Person, How to Thrive When the World Overwhelms You. This book in particular spoke to me because I've been called sensitive. I would probably refer to myself as sensitive. And a lot of times I feel like that sensitivity affects how I navigate the world and how I'm able to deal with things. So I'm just kind of curious because a lot of the stuff that I was reading about this online kind of, I don't know, I felt like might be helpful to me because I have been told by like other people that I'm too sensitive. It's just one of my insecurities. Like I'm very insecure about like my sensitive. In the beginning of this book, there's like a 16-point quiz that's a true or false, but it kind of surprised me, even being aware that I'm a pretty sensitive person. I pretty much ticked off true on every single point, so evidently I'm a HHSP, a highly sensitive person, which before reading this book was a major insecurity of mine, and now I'm able to digest it a little easier. Having this book explain some of the feelings that I'm having, whether that's physically or mentally, made it make a lot more sense to me, because just because you feel something doesn't mean you know why you're feeling it or you can't logically explain it. So having someone logically explain it, I was like, oh. Good morning. I know you don't want to be awake. Buddy's like, shut up. So I've started The Highly Sensitive Person. Already right off the bat, I feel like a lot of this is resonating with me. I get stimulated easily, if that makes sense. Like I said, overly sensitive, or just my tolerance level was really low for things. I didn't have a high threshold. And reading this, I'm realizing that like there's a reason for that, and it could be like genetically, or it could be just the way I'm wired. I'm feeling pretty optimistic about this one being helpful. This actually was probably one of the more helpful books that I read during this whole experiment. And I also liked that this book really talked about the stigmatization of people who are HSPs. Essentially, an HSP could be described as someone who's an introvert, who's a little bit more timid and shy, or that's kind of like the stereotype that society puts on HSPs. But in reality, a lot of times as HSPs are more observant, we're more creative, we're more self-aware, we're more compassionate towards others. So instead of having all of these like negative stereotypes I always had in my mind about being a highly sensitive person, I was like, you know what? Yeah, that's right. I do notice a lot of things. I am very aware of my environment and myself and how I might react to it. So it was actually very illuminating for me as a person. The main takeaway besides all that from this book was to be a good caretaker for myself. She really talks about viewing yourself as an infant, like your infant mind, and kind of acting as your own caretaker. How would you take care of you as a baby? I wasn't giving myself the nurturing that I needed when I needed to like take a break, or I needed to like step away from something or sleep even. And I think in viewing yourself as an infant, you learn that in nurturing those parts of you, you learn to work with yourself instead of fighting with yourself constantly. A lot of times she basically says, imagine yourself as an infant or a younger child. How would you deal with someone who is experiencing what you do? So it's mainly figuring out a way to express more compassion towards your feelings and not forcing yourself through the world, because a lot of times I want to like swim upstream and go against the grain with myself, when the truth of it is that's just who you are. And so being able to work with those characteristics instead of against them is the best way for us to navigate through life. At the end of the day, you are who you are. Let's embrace it. I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This one was a bit of a shot in the dark when I picked it up, but the title was really appealing to me. This is called Overcoming Unwanted Intrusive Thoughts, a CBT-based guide to getting over frightening, obsessive, or disturbing thoughts. So, I picked this up because, again, one of the things that I find I struggle with is I have a very catastrophizing mind. In fact, I'm a natural catastrophizer, so I always think worst case scenario. So to me, that seems like a frightening, obsessive, disturbing thought. In the book, she refers to them as like sticky thoughts. And this book covered any type of quote unquote sticky thought, from like violent to harmful to disturbing, humiliating, nonsensical. Any type of thought, you're basically like, why am I having this? She covers. One of the things that I really like that she discussed about these obtrusive thoughts is that you frankly can't control them. And instead of coming from the conscious mind, like I think a lot of us believe, at least that's what I thought, they are actually unconscious thoughts. So hearing that I am not my thoughts was a big breakthrough for me. A lot of times throughout the book, to illustrate thinking patterns, she used 3 like personified voices in the mind. So it was worried voice, false comfort, and wise mind. So all of those would interact, and wise mind was the thing that you're supposed to go with. Having her illustrate through those different voices was very good for me who needs things like explained. So I liked that aspect of the book. However, one of the things I found really contradictory with her book was some of her actually ways of illustrating her points. In the book, to be specific, she has one example where she talks about there's a party that you threw, and then while you're in your party and having a good time, you notice someone is eating your shrimp. And she specifically makes a point to say like he's kind of unkept and just strange looking in general. And the idea of that man at your party is the unwanted thought. And her basic premise in saying how to deal with unwanted thoughts is to accept them, allow them to pass, and then move on. Essentially, you're just acknowledging that it's just a thought and it's not something you have to act on. And so she was like, you know, he's not bothering anyone, so why even deal with him? I'm sorry, but if I'm throwing a party and there's a strange man eating my delicious, expensive shrimp, I'm gonna be like, what are you doing here? Get out of my party. I don't know you. So that example to me was a moot point. And she also had another one where she's talking about external reassurance and postpartum depression. So she has a dialogue going between the different like parts of your brain. and or parts of the thoughts. And she had one on postpartum that if I were pregnant, I think it would be kind of harmful, because I think sometimes communicating things to other people is not necessarily for like perpetuating the worried mind. Like, I feel like when you speak to other people, it's not necessarily always for false comfort, which it came across to me that's what she was associating with. Sometimes you just need reassurance to know, like, if you're normal, and sometimes that can be very validating for some people. So I felt like she definitely wrote that off, and I don't know, like, there was definitely some serious, I mean, it's talking about intrusive thoughts, so there are definitely a lot of like trigger warning type of thoughts, and it got pretty like vicious or visceral, because, you know, that's just kind of how therapy is sometimes. Maybe it came off differently to me and I interpreted it differently, but that was just kind of weird. I guess this is, again, another one of those things you like take everything with a grain of salt, or like take the stuff that you find relevant and just kind of like do whatever with the rest. I just thought it was a really bad example, and I didn't agree with it. Overall, I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Next, we have another extremely popular book, which is How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. And this was one of the books, when I Googled anxiety books, was the first to pop up. It was kind of similar to the It's All Small Stuff or Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, in the sense of the formatting of it was kind of broken up in bits of advice for each chapter. And he used a lot of anecdotal experiences from other people to explain his thinking process. This book is old, and it read very outdated and old. I mean, this book was published, I think, in like 1948. I mean, my edition's from 1975, and the pages are literally falling out of the binding, so I had to be very delicate as I read this book. Also, side note, this does have quite a bit of biblical references, which I actually don't mind myself, but just throwing that out there in case you're curious. Surprisingly, the main takeaway for this book for me was in his description of how to properly read this book and get the most out of it, because he basically states this is going to be something you'll have to revisit in the future. Take your time reading through the pages, really absorb what they have to say, and when you're experiencing other hardships in life or heightened anxiety, come back to this book and read some of the pages, get some relief. And that hit me in a way, because it made me realize, like, wow, I was kind of looking at this as not necessarily a cure-all, because like I said, I knew this was never going to be a silver bullet. These were always just going to be tools for me, but it made me kind of look at my anxiety a little differently, because in a way I always assumed I would eventually be cured of it. It made me realize that that's most likely not going to be the case, and I have to accept it. Anxiety is probably going to be something I will deal with as a constant for the rest of my life, but if I have ways of coping with it, then I can be happy with that. And so, yeah, I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well, but in a weird way, it made me feel better. Overall, I like that message. I appreciate the anecdotal stories. The one criticism I do have of this book is that it did feel a little bit like, if you think like this, this will happen. Just finished this, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. There was a lot of anecdotal stories, and it felt a little bit like, if you think this, then you'll feel this way. And it's a little, you know, I can see the motivation behind it and how it can be motivational, but what if that doesn't work? Or like, you know, in theory that's nice, but in practice, I think we all know it's a bit of a different story. And I understand this is a simplified anxiety book, but it did feel like an oversimplification of complex feelings and emotions. And it can be a little discouraging when you're like, but the book says, if I think like this, I'll feel like this, when you don't. So keep that in mind. It is basically just a very pure introduction to the idea of dealing with stress and anxiety in your life. 3 out of 5 stars. The last book I have is Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Made Simple: 10 Strategies for Managing Anxiety, Depression, Anger, Panic, and Worry. I'm pretty sure if you search up like anxiety book or self-help anxiety book in Amazon, this is the first book to pop up, and that's how I found this book. This by far was the most actionable book that I picked, and that was one thing that I liked about it. I liked that it really did give you step-by-step ways of breaking down thought patterns, emotions, and feelings. And it did so in a general format of An event leads to a thought, which provokes an emotion, which usually leads to a behavior. Now, besides that, the most helpful takeaway for me in this book was actually a table on 56 and 57, and these are the thinking errors or cognitive distortions. So it laid out really clearly some example thoughts that you might have. So for me, being a catastrophizer that I am, the example would be a customer got really mad at me today, so my boss will probably fire me. Description, thinking a situation is much worse than it is. So being able to be like, yeah, that's something that I would think about, and having it described and labeled for me was actually very helpful. So there are a lot of other, obviously, thinking things in here, thinking errors. So I liked seeing that broken down for me. To be honest, I didn't have really any issues with this book. I actually had bought this like a year ago and had been slowly working through it, and I wanted to include it in this video because I thought let's do this. Let's actually give this a proper go. So I would give this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Let's go ahead and sum up my thoughts, shall we? Now you'll notice that I didn't give any of these books a 5 out of 5 rating, nor did I really give any of these books a super strong rating. That's mostly because I felt like none of these books completely resonated with me 100%. Now, to explain that, I actually think that makes perfect sense. These books are written for the general feeling of anxiety or the emotions that you're feeling, or anger, depression, whatever they're discussing. They're never going to be 100% applicable to me, every little bit and piece in these books. And that's actually perfect. And again, like I mentioned earlier, these books are going to speak differently towards other people. And my whole point in making this video was really to not only challenge myself and experience reading these all together and being able to cross-compare them and see what worked with me, eat the meat, spit out the bones. But I know a lot of people are going through these like panic or anxiety. And if I said anything in this video that could make you feel better or make you feel heard, I felt like this was worth it. If I hit on any points from these books that you find helpful, yes, pick them up. It's a book. I bought actually all mine used, so they were a couple bucks a pop, and if they can be a way to relieve any of the ways you're feeling or thinking, I think these are excellent tools. Would I do this again or something similar? Yes, because I realized through this whole experience, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I really did only intend for this to take me a couple of weeks. Not because I wanted to rush the experience, but that's just the pace that I read books. And in slowing down and really absorbing the books and taking a longer period to read it, it put me in a state of working on my anxiety. Like day to day, I think it's easier to push it to the wayside and not feel it because it's hard. It is so hard to process these feelings and anxiety. If you've ever been to therapy, I leave therapy feeling drained and honestly sometimes worse than when I went in. And being in that state for 2 to 3 months, I was able to really practice these things in my day-to-day life. I was able to really challenge myself and put these things to the test. So I really feel like I can speak on these now. I talked about main takeaways from each of these books, but I did want to give you guys like a main takeaway for this video. If this is the one piece of advice that I can give you when dealing with anxiety, is that the best way to deal with it is to accept and let go. Most of the times my anxiety is made worse by me fighting it, and almost welcoming it in or embracing that side of me makes me worry about it less or stress out about it less. I mentioned a lot of the reasons why I think I have such severe anxiety throughout this video, but another main reason I think I have it is because my anxiety is a control-based anxiety. So things that I can't control, I get anxiety over. I feel like sometimes I'm out of control and that gives me anxiety. And so accepting that life is just something you can't control, accepting that sometimes I have thoughts or feelings and emotions that I can't control, allowing them to flow through me and letting it pass has been the most empowering thing that I have gained from this experience. The last thing I want to leave with you guys before I close out this video is that you are not weak, you are not a bad person, you are not your anxiety, and it is most definitely not your fault. I'm not actually sure how long this video is going to be, how much I'm going to be able to cut out of this video. There's so many things I want to discuss about this topic, but for the sake of creating an entertaining and engaging piece of content, I'm going to cut myself off here. I do want to say, through doing this, I would love to do this with other type of self-help books, with business books, finance books, any other type of things that I can read and like boot camp myself, I am kind of all for. I really enjoyed this experience. So let me know in the comment section down below what your guys' thoughts on this video is. If you found anything helpful, if you have tidbits of advice to share with us or share with me, I would love to read that in the comment section down below. And also be sure to give this video a like so I know if you guys like this style of content, if I should do this more in the future. And as always, I hope you guys are happy and healthy, and don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, share with your friends and family, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys. I'm like really proud of myself.